Hello, boys and girls. I want to talk today about Sloterdijk's book, which is a recent translation, Infinite Mobilization. It concerns our current time, but okay, who is Peter Sloterdijk? Let's talk about that first. So I'm a little bit proud that I have been in a class with Peter Sloterdijk and that I could ask him some questions. I regard him to be the greatest philosopher of all time, but he's very controversial and in Germany not really accepted as a philosopher. He has written an incredible amount of books. I just counted it recently. I think, was it here in the list of Wikipedia? I think it's like over 40 books that he has written. And each book is incredibly creative, if you ask me. So without further ado, let's just jump into his book, Infinite Mobilization, and let's ask what this actually means. I skipped the premises. I think they are not so important. Actually, the book is called in German Eurotaoism. But I think that the publishers thought, okay, if we call it Eurotaoism, we won't really have a good selling point. And that's why they called it Infinite Mobilization, which I also think is a bit of a better term. Let's, however, have a very brief look into the theory of Sloterdijk in general, so that we can actually start. So this was an article on Sloterdijk by Eduard Mendiata, and he talks about Sloterdijk's most influential book, The Critique of Cynical Reason, and he says Sloterdijk opposes the all-pervasive modern cynical thought that he diagnoses as a contemporary malaise to a more originary cynical thought. This is the thought of original cynics like being with as making worlds, the second coming. So, and what does that mean? So nowadays we find a lot of people who hold a very negative attitude towards the world, and they call that critical spirit. And their critical spirit is something that Sloterdijk defines as a malaise, a sickness, because first of all, it does not change the world, and it holds itself captured in a state of being depressed. And as we will see in the book Infinite Mobilization, this depressive thought has a motivating power for moral actions that, however, make it worse than before. And what his Eurotaoism is about, and you see I have taken a lot of notes here. So his Eurotaoism is the felicitous projection invented for the sake of estranging ourselves from our lost past. This invention is what is needed, according to Sloterdijk, to arrest the mobilization of the planet, which plunges us into the desolation that incites a diabolical Kantianism. The imperative of modernity, always more motion for the sake of motion, has unleashed a kinetic politics of acceleration that turns everything into an industrial wasteland. So I believe that Sloterdijk says that our world is mobilizing, and the diabolical Kantianism that is mentioned here is an imperative of changing our world. And Sloterdijk believes that our world has been already changed enough. We had already enough programs which intention was to change the world to the better, but they all had devastating side effects. And instead of pursuing such a project and thereby weighing into the infinite mobilization, we should rather get to a more calm Taoist position where we transform the active voices into passive voices of participation, where we rather do less than more. And with that being said, I think we can go directly into the text. So first of all, Sloterdijk discusses here the modern dilemma, and that is the question whether humans can still comprehend the general development of the modern world that they have set in motion. And of course, the modernity assumes that we can have a transcendental viewpoint by which we can understand the whole of the world, maybe not in its details, but in its general plan, in its general godlike superstructure that we can comprehend. And then we can take our own fate into our own hands and navigate us through this superstructure of the world. And, well, we fill out the details later, as Kant would say. And of course, Sloterdijk promotes a postmodern understanding according to which we cannot simply comprehend the world. And it is guided by a very superficial insight that nothing turns out the way it was planned. For even though man may propose, it is still the gods who dispose, whatever the case may be. The a priori of an old world practical life experience is, if it happens as it should, it happens differently than it was planned. Well, this thought is not very hard to grasp. I think the book was written in 1989, even though it was recently translated. And it seems that the general thesis is very superficial, and everybody says, well, this is a commonplace, everybody knows that. Nothing is going as it is planned, so what are you telling us? Nevertheless, Sloterdijk points out that modernity promises us a world in which things turn out as planned because people are able to accomplish what they want. And if not, they are able and willing to learn. In modern times, it is the will to power of the can-do spirit that makes the world go round. And what is this can-do spirit? It's this managerial attitude that by virtue of studies, we can understand and plan the world ultimately and decide what is our fate. We have this thought clearly in the transhumanist movement of, let's say, Ray Kurzweil, who claims that by virtue of a AI revolution, we will plan everything that happens. We will take full control, not even of our own history, but of the complete universe. And this is also what Sloterdijk criticizes. So the total movement of the world is to be the implementation of our plans for it. The movements of our day-to-day lives become progressively identical with the movement of the world itself. The process of the world as a whole increasingly resembles an expression of our lives. Things occur as planned because that which occurs is increasingly an event of our own making. So why do we have the illusion that we can plan the world? Because the human momentum of history has grown to an incredible proportion, and most of what we see in the world nowadays is not nature anymore, but it's the product of human intervention and the product of human production. And this makes us believe that we really manipulate the world itself. At its innermost core, modernity wants to create nature in addition to history. As this evil century draws to a close, it dawns on us that making history was just a pretext. The crucial issue of the modern era is the nature that is to be made. And how should we understand that? So in former times, we had humans as nature being part of nature. There was no human culture that was developing on top of nature. That means a human being was born and a human being died the way it was born. The world didn't change. With the invention of history, there is a pocket of resistance within nature that develops itself and that supersedes the horizon of the individual human being. It means that humans produce a history that is decoupled from the development of nature. A city lasts longer than the individuals who live in that city. A human historical product survives the natural limitations of humans. Now, this was the modern era where people realized, oh, we live in these cities, and they discovered this historical process itself, and they tried to make this historical process their own in a sense that they started to transform all nature into a historical product. And in that sense, history became nature again. And this is what Sloterdijk calls the Kinetic Utopia. It means that we try to extend the movement of history and to induce it to everything that is. The paradoxes displayed by the very development of the modern era constitute thus newly formed and unusual problem. Constitute the thus newly formed and unusual problem world. A post-history imposes itself onto history, an epi-nature onto nature, and a post-modernity onto modernity. So what is this postmodern era? It is a superplanned society, but not because man proposes and God disposes. Rather, this notion that it must occur differently is both inherent in it and not quite understood by our thoughts and action, and it pushes right through our venture with an unstoppable irony. So what is the irony of all this modernity? That after we thought that we can take over the fate of history, we figure out that everything is in a constant process of change and that everything goes not as it was supposed to happen. And things unfailingly do not happen according to plan because as we think through and bring forth what is supposed to occur, we automatically set in motion something else as a byproduct, something we did not think about, did not want, and failed to consider. Once set in motion, it propels itself forward with a dangerous tenacity. It seems that we have surrounded ourselves with an epi-nature of consequences that slip away from the grasp of our history-making praxis, like a secondary physis. With mounting unease, we watch as the self-perpetuating side effects of modern progress spill over into controlled projects. It is a slide into an uncontrollable and catastrophic heteromobility. So it's not an autonomy that we have created, but by our desire to be autonomous, to be mobile ourselves, to set in motion, we have created a second product that was not intended, but that is an inevitable result, a side effect of our motion itself. Okay, all of these thoughts are not very new, right? I mean, 30 years later, we know, okay, everything we do sets in motion something else. But Sloterdijk here just wants to point out that it is not so much about the evil causes of evil human beings, the evil reasons that, let's say, an idealized Nazi or Adolf Hitler has. It is more that there is a motion in process that sets in motion other processes, and we have to understand our times as a infinite mobilization, a kinetic energy that just goes on and on and on. And at the center of that stands the thinking avalanche, humans as thinkers who do not certainly know what they are, who cannot predict themselves, but who know that their civilizing process turns out to be a pressing ontological problem. What becomes a given in this process is nothing other than a self-reflexive natural catastrophe. So humans thinking about themselves know that they are the problem, but they cannot stop it. The Thinking Avalanche is the industrial post-Christian counterpart to Pascal's thinking reed, which once upon a time trembled in the icy breath of the modern era. So what was Pascal saying? Pascal said, well, we humans are no more than reed, but at least they are thinking. And Sloterdijk now says, no, we are not just a thinking reed. We are an avalanche. We are a force of nature that thinks it can control, but it is no longer the endangered life that is endangered by nature. It is now he himself setting off the landslides, these avalanches that can bury him alive. So human beings in their dangerous capacity of thinking are endangering themselves. Okay, that was so much for an introduction to Sloterdijk. It's not like a very complicated thought yet, but the next time we will come to the very interesting consequences. So if you are interested in that, then subscribe, give it a like. If you followed up to here, I hope you do that. I think Sloterdijk is one of the most interesting thinkers, which this text, even though it is 30 years old, will reveal. So stay with me, and other than that, live long and prosper. Bye-bye.